Thanks for taking time to check out my presentation. If you have questions after the presentation about this research or other research, feel free to email me at the email address on the slide. Our topic today for this research was relationships among humor styles, funniness ratings of jokes, and fatigue. The big question that started this line of research was, what role does a arousing language play in affecting our everyday lives? And so arousing language would be humor, curse words, stimulating stories, anything that we do verbally that activates our central sympathetic nervous system. Prior research that I conducted with a graduate student, Maria Andrea Hurtado Morales, found a link between how often people use humor and the level of sleep quality. So poor sleep would perhaps relate to having more fatigue during waking. And we found in that study that those with the poorest sleep quality reported using the negative humor styles more frequently. They also used curse words more frequently if their sleep quality was poor. In the study, we used two measures of sleep quality, so in some ways we were not directly assessing fatigue, only maybe a precursor to fatigue. And the conclusion in that study was that if one is feeling fatigued, tired, hard to keep awake, having high sleep pressure, that using arousing language could be a way to temporarily boost alertness and mood, boost your awakeness temporarily. So in the present study, we wanted to take a more in-depth approach and measure fatigue directly. We also wanted to look at individual differences in circadian rhythms, a measure known as chronotype. The questionnaire from 1976 is titled Morningness and Eveningness. So this sort of assesses people's place on the continuum of a morning person, an early riser, or a night owl, somebody who feels at their best in the evening time. And we wanted to see where these two variables related to how often people use humor in the humor style questionnaire. But also in this study, we assessed how they rated the funniness of jokes and non-jokes. So when they're rating jokes, do they find them more or less funny when they're more tired? So chronotype, as I said, refers to this individual difference variable. People who score high on this questionnaire, the MEQ, would be more morning people. And if you score low in the questionnaire, you're more of an evening night owl person. And some of the questions involve asking people when they get up, when they feel they're doing their best work, when they want to start doing work. And so when you think about the typical night owl, the shift in their day compared to the morning person is obvious. So people feel better at their best at night rather than in the morning. So our hypotheses going into this research was that those reporting higher levels of fatigue or sleepiness would rate jokes as funnier and report more frequent use of humor than others. And this would be the sense that when you're tired, you really kind of are hungry for stimulating stimuli. So perhaps something funny would be experienced as stimulating and you would find it funnier. We also hypothesized that chronotype would be related to funniness ratings and the use of the humor styles. So people that are more fatigued, probably the group who are considered night owls, may have more fatigue due to this circadian rhythm shift. They might, in fact, show the strongest pattern of a relationship between fatigue and humor. We also anticipated that the chronotype of our participants might be related to when they do the survey. So the night owls could be completing the study really late at night, but the early morning risers, the morning type people, would take the survey early in the day. So this would be interesting to look at, does the time of day that someone takes the survey matter? We recruited 550 participants, most of them women. 414 were women, 121 were men. We had 8 answer as neither, and 7 that preferred not to respond. Our average age of participants was 20.74 years. The sample was a majority white, with 20% belonging to more than one group, and the other groups represented under 5%. And all participants received course credit for their participation in the study. And as I mentioned some of these measures before, but in terms of our materials, we assessed fatigue using the fatigue assessment scale, chronotype using the morning-eveningness questionnaire, and sleepiness is one question that's used the Stanford Sleepiness Scale, which is a one-item measure. We used the Humor Styles questionnaire by Martin et al., and we collected funniness ratings for jokes and non-jokes constructed for the study. I'll tell you a little bit about how we constructed the jokes and non-jokes. I found jokes from the internet, kind of jokes that I thought most of my undergraduates would not have heard recently, but very short jokes. You might think of them as one-liners. I think each had 2 sentences with the punchline in the second sentence, and participants were asked to rate it on a 1 to 5 scale, with 5 being extremely funny. For non-jokes, these conditions, I started with a real joke, and I changed 1 or 2 words in the punchline to turn it into a non-joke. So the non-joke example here is, why were the teacher's eyes crossed? She couldn't control them. That's the non-joke. And it came from the joke originally when the joke was, why were the teacher's eyes crossed? She couldn't control her pupils. And so by changing her pupils to them, it removes the humor. Here's a second example. In the original joke, it's hard to explain puns to kleptomaniacs because they always take things literally. In the non-joke version, it's hard to explain puns to kleptomaniacs because they always take things. And so by removing the word literally, you take the funny out. The participants were recruited from our SONA system in the Department of Psychology, which enrolls about 1,500 students a year or every semester. We put this study on a Qualtrics survey, and on average, participants took 30 minutes to do the survey. The ordering of questions within each scale was randomized, but the ordering of scales in the survey were the same for each participant. We had the joke and non-joke rating at the beginning so we could get them fresh for the funniness ratings. So for the results, hypothesis 1, we expected that there would be a relationship between fatigue, sleepiness, and the 4 humor styles. And we found that this was partially supported. Unlike the prior research, we found fatigue, unlike sleep quality, was related to each of the 4 humor styles. So affiliative, self-enhancing, aggressive, self-defeating. The magnitude of the correlations was largest for self-defeating, which was observed in the prior study. And so I was happy to see the smaller correlations emerge for the other 3 humor styles. For the 1-word item for sleepiness, the one item measure sleepiness, we found a relationship only for self-defeating humor. So more fatigue, more sleepiness, you're reporting that you use self-defeating humor more often. In fact, for fatigue, people who reported the highest levels of fatigue reported using affiliative humor and self-enhancing humor less often. That's somewhat surprising. And they reported using aggressive humor and self-defeating humor more often. So fatigue seems to be related to increases in the use of negative forms of humor, and less frequent use of the positive forms of humor. For the joke and non-joke funniness ratings, we found that there were no significant relationships among fatigue, sleepiness, and the joke funniness, non-joke funniness, and the difference. So when you take the funniness ratings average and subtract the average for non-jokes from jokes. So it should have been a positive difference, but the correlations were not significant. When you do compare the overall ratings for jokes and non-jokes, we did find a highly significant difference. The jokes were funnier, thank goodness. That was what should have happened, and it did happen. So for hypothesis 2, does chronotype matter? And here we find that it matters for two of the humor styles. Affiliative, the more of a morning person you are, the less that you're using affiliative humor. And the more of a morning person you are, the less that you report using aggressive humor. And the relationships for the other two humor styles were not significant. When you look at chronotype and the funniness ratings, there were no significant differences for jokes, non-jokes, or the difference. But when you do look at whether chronotype is related to fatigue and sleepiness, those were significant. So it is, as you would expect it to be, people that are more of a morning person report less fatigue and less sleepiness. In terms of hypothesis 3, when we looked at the time of day that the participants did the survey, we did find that it varied. And so we had 289 who took the survey, maybe like a morning person from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and 233 took the survey between 4 p.m. and midnight, and only 28, I was happy to see this, only 28 were burning the midnight oil and doing the survey after midnight. So there was a relationship if we divided up to time of day into these three categories. We found that it was correlated with the individual's chronotype. So that made sense and was good to see. But the funniness ratings didn't differ when you compared, people rating the joke between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. versus rating it at 4 p.m. to midnight. So here the groups didn't differ in their funniness ratings. I took time to explore using multiple regression how the chronotype, fatigue, and sleepiness question could together predict the four humor styles, as well as the difference in funniness of jokes and non-jokes, and found some significant findings. For three of the humor styles, the model was significant: affiliative, aggressive, and self-defeating. And in terms of the amount of variance accounted for, it was small, 5% for affiliative, 9% for aggressive, and 11% for the self-defeating. So there is some indication that when you look at these variables together, fatigue does emerge as a strong, significant predictor. It's accounting for a small amount of variance, however. So in summary, fatigue was related to all four humor styles. More fatigue related to less frequent use of the positive humor styles and more frequent use of the negative humor styles. More sleepiness was related to more frequent use of only the self-defeating humor style. Greater morningness was related to less frequent use of affiliative and aggressive humor. And the time of day in which participants completed the study was related to their chronotype. So implications include that, we really don't fully understand the relationship yet between fatigue and humor, the use of it, and the experience of it. I think there's more to figure out for future research. Doing a longitudinal research design in the future would make a lot of sense to hit people up with the same jokes or, different jokes, but ask them on different days and different times a day to rate the funniness. And then examining what the possible causes of the fatigue and sleepiness, how that could matter. So some fatigue could be different than others. So is the fatigue just sleep pressure? You haven't been, it's been a long time since you woke up. Or is it fatigue from illness or exhaustion? I suspect this would matter. So thank you for your attention and have a great rest of your day.